In this video, I'm going to show you how to make your English more concise and fluent using reduced relative clauses. How's it going, everyone? I'm David, and welcome to the English channel. As you may know, relative clauses are a type of dependent clause that gives us information about a noun in a sentence. There are two types of relative clause: defining or restrictive relative clauses, which give us information that is necessary to completely identify a noun in the sentence, and there are non-defining or non-restrictive relative clauses, which just give us extra information about a noun in a sentence. So this video is going to focus on reducing or removing words from a defining relative clause. Later on, I will discuss reducing non-defining relative clauses, but as the rules are a bit different, I'm going to treat them differently, okay? Anyway, let's look at reducing defining relative clauses. So there are two ways we can do this, depending on the role that the relative pronoun has in the relative clause. If the relative pronoun is an object pronoun, we can simply just remove the relative pronoun and the sentence still works. So, if I had the sentence, "This is the guy who Jack saw stealing a bottle of Lambrini," all we need to do is just remove the word who, so it becomes, "This is the guy Jack saw stealing a bottle of Lambrini." Okay, that's very simple. But how do we know if the relative pronoun is acting as an object pronoun? Well, this is very simple too. An object pronoun is always followed by another noun and then a verb. So in our example, we had the word who plus Jack plus saw. So here we know that it's an object pronoun. That's all there is to it. I'll give you another example just to reinforce this point. So the full sentence could be, "The car which Jack sold wasn't actually his," could just become, "The car Jack sold wasn't actually his." And that's all there is to reducing a defining relative clause when the relative pronoun is an object pronoun. But what about when the relative pronoun is acting as a subject pronoun? Well, this is when reducing relative clauses becomes interesting. If we had a sentence that goes, "I saw this weird guy who was looking at me," it would sound a lot smoother and more fluent if we said, "I saw this weird guy looking at me." So what do you think is happening here? I'm going to give you a couple more examples to see if you can work it out. So, another full sentence might be, "Any students who don't hand in their homework will be brutally punished." And its reduced form, "Any students not handing in their homework will be brutally punished." Okay, one more example, then I'll tell you. So, if we had the full sentence, "The car that was parked on double yellow lines was towed away." And its reduced form, "The car parked on double yellow lines was towed away." Okay, so what's happening is this. When the relative pronoun is a subject pronoun, all we need to do to reduce it is remove the relative pronoun, remove any auxiliary verbs, and turn the verb into a participle, unless it already is one. For active sentences, we use a present participle, which is like the verb with an ing stuck on the end. If the verb is passive, we use the past participle, which is like the third column of verbs that you learn, or being plus past participle if the passive verb is continuous. And incidentally, if the relative clause uses a negative verb, then we place not before the participle in the reduced clause. Okay? But then you might think, what happened to the tense in the relative clause? Well, it doesn't matter. We just kind of ignore it. The only time we do care about it is if it's a passive continuous construction, so we use a being plus past participle. As participles are what we call non-finite verb forms, they don't show a tense, even though they're named present and past participles. So if we have a sentence that uses a past continuous in the relative clause in the passive voice, the full form of it would be, "The student who was being led away began to swear at the police officers." Now, when we reduce it, it just becomes, "The student being led away began to swear at the police officers." That wasn't me when I was a student. Now compare this to another sentence that uses the present continuous in the passive voice in the relative clause. So the full sentence is, "I can see a car that is being towed away. Now notice how its reduced version is just, I can see a car being towed away. Okay, it still uses the same being plus past participle in the relative clause. Okay, so some more sentences to compare. In the first sentence, in the relative clause, we're going to use a past perfect in the active voice. So the full sentence is, the kids who had started the fire were apprehended by the authorities. The reduced sentence is going to be, the kids starting the fire were apprehended by the authorities. Now let's look at a sentence that uses an active present simple in the relative clause. So the full sentence, the cat that lives next door often comes over to play in the garden. And now it's reduced form, the cat living next door often comes over to play in the garden. Do you see how it's still the same present participle? Doesn't matter if it's past perfect or present simple, okay? So it's all pretty simple, but there are some important points to know about this, okay? So it's really important to remember that we can only reduce the relative clause in this way if the relative pronoun is also a subject pronoun. If it's an object pronoun, all we can do is remove the relative pronoun, okay? Another important point is that we can't reduce the relative clause if we are talking about a singular subject that has performed a finished action. So look at this example to see what I mean. If we have the full sentence, the man who found an Anglo-Saxon coin hoard sold it to a museum. Now it would sound wrong if we said, the man finding an Anglo-Saxon coin hoard sold it to a museum. But remember, this is only for singular subjects. If I said, the people who found an Anglo-Saxon coin hoard sold it to a museum, where people here is a plural subject, we could say, the people finding an Anglo-Saxon coin hoard sold it to a museum. And likewise, we could have a singular subject, but it's like using a present simple verb, so it's just like a general habit. Then we can also use it too. And lastly, we don't use perfect participles in reduced relative clauses. If you don't know, a perfect participle is a combination participle made of the words having plus a past participle. As I'll explain more in my next video, clauses that use a perfect participle actually have an adverbial meaning to show either the cause for something in the main clause or a preceding action to the events in the main clause. But more on that later, okay? I'm just going to interrupt the video here because in my enthusiasm to explain this cool way of reducing relative clauses, I actually forgot about some other types of relative clause structures that can be reduced or changed in some way. As a proud English teacher, I feel it would be remiss of me to not mention them, but don't worry, it's simpler than what we've just looked at. So while talking about reducing relative clauses, this video has really been talking about a structure that goes relative pronoun plus a verb or verb phrase and then plus a noun. But there are other structures. So when we have a relative clause that uses a prepositional phrase after the pronoun, so something like, the band that are on stage right now are absolutely cringe. On stage is the prepositional phrase here, and we can just remove the relative pronoun and the be verb, so it's now, the band on stage right now are absolutely cringe. Another example could be, the girl who was on the table fell off. And so after removing the relative pronoun and the be verb, we now have, the girl on the table fell off. Like I said, this isn't complicated. There are two other structures I should mention, which both involve adjectives. So a structure which uses a be verb followed by a single adjective after the relative pronoun, like, the car that is dirty needs a clean, can't really be reduced to a single word, but we can reposition the adjective so it comes before the noun. So, the dirty car needs a clean. This is super simple, and I imagine most of you already know this, so I'll just move on to the last relative clause structure. So, when a relative clause that has a sense verb, like look, taste or sound, and an adjective following the relative pronoun, so something like, the song that sounds best will win the competition, we can turn it into an adjective phrase placed before the noun using an adjective plus sense verb present participle plus noun structure and then leave out the relative pronoun. So the sentence is now, The best sounding song will win the competition. Remember, here we need to join the adjective to the present participle sense verb with a hyphen, okay? Another example could be, the water that looks weird tastes funny. Again, here we take the adjective weird and join it to the present participle of the sense verb, so looking, and then place it before the noun. So the new sentence is, the weird looking water tastes funny. So now I can sleep easy knowing I've covered everything. Let's get back to the video. So that's all I need to tell you about reducing defining relative clauses. But what about reducing non-defining relative clauses? Well, it works in pretty much the same way, but there are some important differences. So firstly, we can't reduce a non-defining relative clause if the relative pronoun is an object pronoun. So we can't just remove the relative pronoun and still hope that it makes sense. It just doesn't work. So if we have a sentence that goes, in this house, which Jack built himself, is a 30-meter swimming pool, we can't really reduce it to, in this house, Jack built himself is a 30-meter swimming pool. Yeah, that doesn't work as a non-defining relative clause, okay? Another really important point is that unlike reducing defining relative clauses, which are really common in conversation, we only use reduced non-defining relative clauses in writing. At the same time, it's really good to use in writing, and I really suggest that you do this in your writing exams. There are many cool writers which have used reduced non-defining relative clauses, so do it by all means. If you found this video interesting, then subscribe to my channel to get more videos on the English language and how it works. Right, so I've given you lots of information about reduced relative clauses. I think it's now time to put you to the test. I'm going to give you 1 minute to transform these sentences into reduced relative clauses. The answers to the quiz will be at the end of the video, okay? Are you ready? Go! Okay, so there's one last thing I want to talk about. So when we reduce relative clauses using participles, which is what we do when we have a subject pronoun, we are making what is known as a participle clause or a participle phrase. And as it's replacing the full relative clause, we could say that it has an adjectival function. But this is not the only function of a participle clause. So in my next video, we're going to look at participle clauses that have an adverbial function. There's a bit more to it than reduced relative clauses, but it's very cool to use in writing. My upload schedule is all over the place, but I will try to do it as soon as possible. Okay? Right, so now for the answers. If you have any questions about reduced relative clauses or would like me to take a look at some of your own sentences, then make it known down below. Thanks for watching everyone, and I'll see you next time.